The air on the 22nd floor was thin and cold, recycled and sterile. It tasted of nothing, which Daniel Kalen had come to understand was the flavour of immense power. He stood on a subfloor of raw concrete, surrounded by the skeletal frames of what would one day be luxury condos, and watched the woman who was about to ruin him. She moved through the site not like a visitor, but like a surveyor checking the lines of her own property. Her name was Eleanor Vance, and her presence had frozen the entire work crew into a state of functional dormancy. She stopped a few feet from him, her gaze sweeping over the exposed ductwork and bundled wiring as if she were reading the architecture of a failing company. Her suit was a shade of grey, so dark it was nearly black, tailored with a precision that seemed to defy the laws of fabric and thread. It was armour. "Mr. Foreman," she said, her voice calm and devoid of inflection. The actual foreman, a burly man named Gus, had already been dismissed by one of her silent associates. She was looking at Daniel. "I'm not the foreman," Daniel replied, his own voice quiet. He kept his hands loose at his sides, resisting the urge to clench them into fists. She gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod, a gesture of dismissal. "Whoever you are, this site is in violation of 3 separate municipal codes and a variance clause tied to the Vance Corporation's initial funding. As of this moment, all work is to cease. A stop work order has been issued." Daniel watched her, taking in the rigid set of her jaw, the way her core held itself with an unnatural stillness. He knew that stillness. It was the posture of someone bracing against a constant internal impact. He knew because he practiced it himself every single day. He thought of the $200,000 he had turned down just last week, an offer from a tech firm that had somehow found his old contact information. He had said no without a second thought. Now, he was about to lose a carpentry job that paid $17 an hour. "This project is a co-op," Daniel said, the words feeling useless even as he spoke them. "It's for the workers. We self-funded most of it." Eleanor Vance's eyes, the same colour as her suit, finally met his. There was no recognition in them, no flicker of shared history, nothing. "Your funding model is irrelevant," she stated. "The land is ours. The violations are real. The work stops." She turned and her entourage of lawyers and aides moved with her, a silent, disciplined unit. They were gone as quickly as they had arrived, leaving behind only the official notice slapped onto a steel support beam and a profound, echoing silence. Gus walked over, his face pale. "What the hell was that? They can't just do that." Daniel looked at the notice, then out through the empty window frame at the city below. He could see the gleaming obsidian tower of Vance Capital from here. "They can," he said softly. The next morning began as it always did, with the soft padding of small feet. Daniel was already in the kitchen of their small apartment, measuring coffee grounds into a filter. The space was tidy and spare, furnished with pieces he had built himself from reclaimed wood. Each joint was perfect, each surface sanded to a silken finish. It was the only kind of architecture he allowed himself to practice anymore. "Dad," a small voice said. Daniel turned. His son, Leo, stood in the doorway, rubbing sleep from his eyes. At 7 years old, Leo had a solemnity that was sometimes unnerving. He saw things with a clarity that adults spent their whole lives trying to reclaim or forget. "Hey, buddy," Daniel said, his voice instantly softening. "Pancakes or oatmeal?" "Pancakes," Leo decided, climbing onto his designated stool at the small kitchen island. He watched his father move, his head tilted. "Are you going to work today?" Daniel cracked an egg into a bowl, the sound sharp in the quiet room. "No, the project is on hold for a little while." He did not say it was finished. He did not say the woman who owned half the city had shut them down. He just said it was on hold. For a whole year since his wife Sarah's death, he had perfected the art of the partial truth, building a world for his son that was structurally sound, even if its foundations were a lie of omission. He pretended everything was fine. "Oh," Leo said. He picked up a wooden block from a basket on the counter. It was part of a complex set Daniel had carved for him, each piece interlocking in a dozen different ways. "Is it because of the lady?" Daniel stopped whisking the batter. He turned slowly to face his son. "What lady?" "The sad lady," Leo said, fitting 2 blocks together. "I saw her from the window yesterday. She came in a big black car. She looked at our building. She looked empty." Daniel felt a cold knot tighten in his stomach. He had not known Leo was watching. Empty. It was the perfect word. He remembered that look from years ago in a different context. A boardroom, not a construction site. A crisis of numbers, not of concrete. He had seen that same emptiness in her eyes then, just before the world fell apart. "Yeah, buddy," Daniel said, turning back to the stove. "I guess it was because of her." He poured the batter onto the hot griddle, focusing on the sizzle, the smell, the simple physics of it. He had built this life for the same reason he built furniture. It was real. It was tangible. You could touch it. The other world, the one of numbers and algorithms and phantom wealth, was a ghost that had almost taken everything from him. He would not let it touch his son. In her office on the 85th floor of the Vance Capitol Tower, Eleanor Vance felt the ghost Daniel had fled pressing in on all sides. The room was a monument to minimalist control, all glass and steel and muted tones. But the numbers on the holographic display in the centre of the room were a screaming, chaotic red. "It's not responding to any of our countermeasures," said a young analyst named Chen, his voice strained. He was one of a dozen top-tier quants and strategists she had assembled, the best minds money could buy. They looked like the specific quality of educated people encountering a problem their education had not prepared them for. Terrified. "Define not responding," Eleanor said, her voice dangerously quiet. She did not move from her position behind her vast obsidian desk. She had not moved in 3 hours. "It learns," Chen stammered. "We build a firewall, it finds a port, we flood its trading channels. It reroutes through dark pools. It's not just an algorithm, it's adaptive. It's behaving like a predatory biological organism. We're calling it Hydra." Eleanor stared at the cascading data streams. It was a weapon. Someone had designed a weapon and unleashed it on the global financial markets. It was devouring assets, shorting currencies, and creating phantom sell-offs with a speed and complexity that was beyond human intervention. In 48 hours, it would trigger a systemic collapse not seen since the crisis of '08. A crisis that had been her father's legacy. A crisis she had spent the last decade ensuring would never happen again. "Where did it originate?" she asked. "We can't trace it. The point of origin is masked by 1,000 proxy servers. The code is pristine. It's like nothing we've ever seen. It's elegant and brutal all at once." Eleanor felt a cold dread, a feeling she had not experienced since she was a young analyst watching her father, Richard Vance, try to contain the last great fire. He had failed. She would not. "There must be a defense," she said, the words a command, not a question. "Every system has a counter-system. Every code has an exploit." Her head of strategy, a seasoned veteran named Marcus, shook his head. "Not this one. Not with what we have. This code is a generation ahead of anything on the street. To fight it, you'd need something built on the same foundational principles. Something that could think like it, anticipate it." He paused, a strange look on his face. "You'd need a ghost." Eleanor's eyes narrowed. Explain." "There was a project," Marcus said, his voice dropping. "Years ago, before your time as CEO, Project Ethelred. It was your father's pet project, an algorithmic defense system. It was designed to be predictive, to hunt and neutralize threats before they even materialized. The lead designer was a prodigy. He built it from the ground up. And," Eleanor pressed, a sliver of impatience cutting through her control, "the project was scrapped after the '08 crisis. The designer, he was implicated. He vanished. All the files were archived, sealed by your father's direct order." "Get me those files," Eleanor commanded. "And get me the designer's name." An hour later, her loyal aide, Anya, placed a single slim data slate on her desk. Most of the files were corrupted or encrypted beyond their ability to crack on short notice. But one file remained, a personnel record. "The lead architect of Project Ethelred," Anya said, her voice soft. "There isn't much here." He left the company abruptly. No forwarding address. No digital footprint after 2009. It's like he fell off the face of the earth. Eleanor picked up the slate. Her eyes scanned the data. Name, Daniel Kaelin. Title, lead algorithmic architect. And below it, a grainy, decade-old photograph. A younger man, his expression intense, focused. The face was familiar. Her mind raced, connecting disparate points of data. Kaelin, Ethelred, the ghost algorithm. And then another image superimposed itself over the photo on the slate. A man in a dusty work shirt, standing on a concrete subfloor, his eyes calm and resigned as she dismantled his world. The carpenter from the co-op project. The irony was so potent, so absolute. It was like a physical blow. She felt the air leave her lungs. the one man on earth who could save her company, her legacy, and possibly the entire global economy, was the same man whose livelihood she had casually extinguished less than 24 hours ago, the man whose son had looked out a window and seen her for exactly what she was, empty. The past was not a ghost, it was a debt, and it had just come to collect. The backstory was a structure Eleanor had built her life upon, but she was only now realizing she had been reading the blueprints upside down. She and Daniel had not been strangers. They had started at Vance Capital in the same year, two brilliant, hungry analysts under the tutelage of her father, the legendary Richard Vance. Richard saw in Daniel a raw, intuitive genius for systems and code, a talent that complemented Eleanor's own ruthless gift for strategy and market dynamics. For 3 years, they were the golden children. Daniel was the architect, Eleanor the commander. Together, with Richard's guidance, they conceived of Aethelred. It was meant to be a shield, a guardian for the world's financial systems. Daniel poured his soul into it, working with a feverish intensity. He used to say he was not writing code. He was teaching a machine to understand the poetry of mathematics, to see the patterns of fear and greed as a form of language. During that time, he met Sarah. She was another of Richard's protégés, a market strategist with an uncanny ability to see 3 moves ahead of everyone else. Her mind was as sharp as Eleanor's, but where Eleanor was cold and contained, Sarah was warm and vibrant. She and Daniel fell in love quickly, a fact that Richard Vance seemed to approve of, calling them his perfect intellectual pairing. The betrayal was as elegant and brutal as the Hydra Code now eating the market. In the volatile autumn of 2008, as Lehman Brothers collapsed and the world teetered on the brink, Richard came to Daniel. He claimed they could use a component of Aethelred, a predictive submodule Daniel had nicknamed Cassandra, to anticipate the market's fall and insulate Vance Capital, protecting their clients. It was a lie. Richard, driven by a hubris Eleanor had never fully grasped, saw the crash not as a disaster but as an opportunity. He used Daniel's code not as a shield but as a scalpel. He had found a back door in Daniel's creation, a flaw he had secretly cultivated, and used it to amplify the market's panic for his own gain, executing a series of impossibly timed short positions. But the scalpel slipped. The controlled demolition became an uncontrolled implosion, contributing to the wider panic and costing thousands of people their life savings. When the regulators came, Richard needed a scapegoat. He presented them with a doctored version of the Aethelred logs, framing Daniel as a rogue trader who had used the system for his own reckless gambles. He painted Daniel as the villain, the reckless prodigy who flew too close to the sun. Eleanor, consumed by the crisis and trusting her father implicitly, had believed the story. She remembered the meeting where Daniel, his face ashen, tried to explain. He had looked at her, searching for an ally, but she had looked away, her silence a damning verdict. That was the first time she had seen the emptiness in her own eyes reflected back at her. The consequences were catastrophic. Daniel was professionally ruined, but the true cost was far greater. Sarah, who was pregnant with their son, had been working frantically alongside Daniel to prove his innocence. The stress, the long hours, the crushing weight of the betrayal by a man she had considered a mentor and a second father took a devastating toll. She went into premature labour. Leo was 2 months early, and Sarah suffered complications from which she never fully recovered. She passed away a year later, her health and spirit broken by the fallout of Richard's greed. Daniel, holding his infant son, made a choice. He erased himself. He took the remnants of his life, the love for his son, and the quiet dignity that no one could take from him, and he vanished. He abandoned the world of numbers that had promised so much and delivered only ruin. He started working with his hands, finding a quiet solace in the honesty of wood and steel. He built a new life, a small, fortified world where the only bottom line was his son's well-being. He pretended everything was fine, and for a long time it almost was. Now, that world was about to be breached. Finding him again was not difficult for a woman with Eleanor Vance's resources. His life was analogue, but it was not invisible. What was difficult was the drive to his neighbourhood. She sat in the back of her town car, the silent, temperature-controlled cabin, a world away from the streets outside her tinted window. This was a part of the city she owned on paper, but had never truly seen. It was a place of brick walk-ups, bodegas, and children playing on the sidewalks. It was real. It was tangible. The car pulled up in front of a modest, well-kept building. Anya, sitting in the passenger seat, turned to her. "Are you sure you want to do this yourself?" Eleanor did not answer. She got out of the car. The air here was different. It smelled of street food and exhaust, and the faint scent of rain on hot pavement. She walked up the 3 flights of stairs, her heels clicking with an alien sharpness on the worn linoleum. She felt every inch the intruder. She knocked. The door opened, and he was there. Daniel Kaelin. He was wearing a plain t-shirt and jeans. He was not surprised to see her. His eyes, which had been calm and resigned at the construction site, were now guarded, watchful. "Vance," he said. It was not a question. "Kaelin," she replied, her own voice sounding thin and foreign in the small hallway. "May I come in?" He hesitated for a fraction of a second, then stepped back, allowing her to enter. The apartment was small but filled with a warm, clean light. The scent of sawdust and lemon oil hung in the air. Everywhere she looked, there was the evidence of his hands. The perfectly joined bookshelf, the small, sturdy table, the intricate wooden toys scattered on a rug. It was a fortress of quiet integrity. "I know why you're here," he said, closing the door. He did not offer her a seat. "Do you?" she asked. "A market anomaly, a recursive, self-improving algorithm that's behaving like a predator. It's too fast, too smart. Your people can't stop it. You looked in the old files and found a ghost." He recited the facts with no emotion, as if describing the grain on a piece of wood. Eleanor felt a chill. He was disconnected from that world, but he still understood its language, its rhythms. "We need your help," she said, the words costing her more than any billion-dollar deal ever had. Daniel turned to look at a small, framed photo on the bookshelf. It was of Sarah, smiling, her face full of a light that Eleanor had forgotten existed. "The last time I helped Vance Capital," he said, his voice dangerously low, "it cost me everything." The subtext hung heavy in the air between them. "You believed him. You let him destroy me. You let him destroy her." "I know," Eleanor said, and the admission was a crack in her armour. "I know what you think happened. What I thought happened." "I don't think," Daniel corrected her quietly. "I know, and so did your father." He finally looked at her, and for the first time she saw the depth of the wound he carried. It was not anger. It was a profound, settled grief. "The answer is no." "This isn't just about the company," she pressed, taking a step closer. "This is bigger. If this thing isn't stopped, it will cascade. It will wipe out pensions, savings, entire economies. People like the ones in this building will be hurt first and worst. The people you tried to build a co-op for." He was silent for a long moment. He walked to the window and looked down at the street. "You are asking me to go back into the machine that chewed me up and spat me out. You are asking me to look at the numbers that I see every time I close my eyes. Why should I?" "Because you're the only one who can," she said simply. "Because you built the only thing that might be able to stop it. You built Ethelred." He gave a short, bitter laugh. "Ethelred is a memory. Your father made sure of that. He buried it, and he buried me with it." The door to the bedroom creaked open. Leo stood there, holding a drawing. He looked at Eleanor, his expression serious, then at his father. He walked slowly to Daniel and handed him the piece of paper. Daniel took it, his whole posture softening as he looked at it. "What is it, buddy?" he asked. "It's the building," Leo said, his voice a clear, piping sound in the tense room. "I fixed it." Daniel looked at the crayon drawing. It was a child's sketch of a tall building, with a big yellow sun smiling over it. He then looked at Eleanor, his eyes conveying a message clearer than any words. "This is my world now. This is all that matters. I can't help you," he said, his voice final. "Please leave." Eleanor stood there, defeated. She had come expecting to negotiate with a disgraced genius. She had not expected to confront a man who had already lost everything and had nothing left for her to take. She turned and walked out of the apartment, the quiet click of the closing door sounding like the end of the world. But as she walked down the stairs, a single horrifying thought began to form in her mind. The Hydra Code, its elegance, its brutality, the way it knew the system's weaknesses intimately. He built the weapon, she thought, her blood running cold. She had assumed it was a competitor, a rogue state. But who knew the architecture of the financial world better than its master builders? Who had a better reason to burn it all down than Daniel Kaelin? She had come to ask for his help, but maybe she should have come with the police. The thought was sickening, but it was logical. It was the kind of strategic calculation her father would have made. Back in his apartment, Daniel held the drawing, his thumb stroking the waxy crayon sun. He had not lied. He could not help her. But as the image of the cascading red numbers she had inadvertently planted in his mind began to bloom, a different kind of truth emerged. It was not about helping her. It was about honor. The code he had written, Aethelred, was built on a principle of order, of defense. The thing she described, Hydra, was its antithesis. It was a perversion, an echo of his work twisted into something monstrous. He sat down at the small, sturdy table he had built. He had one old encrypted laptop, a relic from his former life that he had never been able to bring himself to destroy. He opened it. For the first time in a decade, he let his mind touch the ghost world. He did not need her data. The patterns Hydra would be making, the rhythms of its attacks, he could feel them on the periphery of the public networks, like a seismic tremor. He worked for an hour, his fingers flying across the keys, a language he thought he had forgotten returning to him like a mother tongue. He was not looking for a way to stop it. He was looking for its signature. Every true artist, every master architect, leaves a mark, a unique turn of phrase in the code, a specific approach to solving a recursive problem, a fingerprint. And then he found it. It was not his own. It was a signature he knew better than his own. It was a piece of obsolete, inefficient but brutally effective code that was the trademark of his first teacher. A man who taught him everything he knew about systems, and then taught him everything he knew about betrayal. It was the digital fingerprint of Richard Vance. The truth hit Daniel with the force of a physical impact. His father-in-law, the man who had destroyed him once, was now trying to destroy the world Eleanor had inherited. It was not revenge against Daniel. It was a final, desperate act of ego from a dying man. Richard was rumoured to be ill, a desire to prove that he was still the master of the chaos he had once helped create. He had not stolen Daniel's work to use it. He had stolen it to corrupt it, to build its dark reflection. Daniel closed the laptop. The problem had changed. This was no longer about Eleanor Vance or her company. This was about family. It was about the legacy of the man who had destroyed his wife. He picked up his phone and dialed the number Anya had left him. "I will look at your data," he said when Eleanor answered. "Send me a secure link, but not for you, and not for the money. This is personal." A few minutes later, the link arrived. He opened it and the screen filled with the screaming red of the Hydra code. He saw it not as a threat, but as a puzzle, a flawed piece of architecture built on his own stolen foundations. He could see its weaknesses, its load-bearing walls. He knew how to bring it down. As he worked, he felt a small hand on his shoulder. Leo So stood behind him, looking at the screen. "Is that the broken building?" he asked. Daniel looked at the complex code, then at his son's innocent face. "Yeah," he said, "it is. But I think I know how to fix it." He had pretended everything was fine for a whole year, for his son's sake. Today, he had stopped pretending. He had let the broken world back in. An hour later, Eleanor Vance returned. He had summoned her. She stood in the doorway, her expression a mixture of hope and suspicion. It's not me," Daniel said without preamble, not looking up from the screen. "The Hydra code. It's not my work." "How can I be sure?" she asked, her voice tight. Daniel finally turned to face her. His expression was calm, but his eyes held an intensity she had not seen in over a decade. "Because the architect of this thing used a brute force entry algorithm that I told him was a vulnerability 10 years ago. It's sloppy. It's arrogant. It's your father's signature." Eleanor's face went pale. The armour she wore, the control she had maintained for her entire adult life, simply disintegrated. The idea was so monstrous, so unthinkable that it had to be true. Her father, the man whose legacy she was fighting to protect, was the one holding the match. At that moment of shattering silence, Leo walked out of his room again. He went not to his father but to Eleanor. He stopped in front of the powerful, broken woman and held out the drawing of the fixed building. "For the sad lady," he said softly, "so you won't be empty." Eleanor stared at the child, then at the crayon drawing. She reached out with a trembling hand and took it. Her composure, held together by sheer will for days, finally broke. A single tear traced a path down her cheek. It was the first time she had cried since her mother's funeral. Daniel watched this quiet, devastating exchange. The world of numbers and lies had collapsed, and in its place was this small, irrefutable moment of human connection. He knew what he had to do. He would dismantle Richard Vance's last, terrible creation. Not for Eleanor, not for the company, but for the quiet boy who saw the sadness in others and offered to fix it. He stood up and walked over to his son. He knelt down, and Leo, sensing the shift in the world, reached out and took his hand. For the first time in a long time, Daniel Kalen felt the foundation beneath him was real. It was not made of numbers or concrete, but of something far stronger. His son was holding his hand. The rest he knew he could fix.